Hello and welcome back to the fourth in the series of the Vangoa'n Bear. This is my Vangoa VA20 CE, and it was a BK ML12. It is the BKM is gone because BK was black, M was matte, and we have removed all of that from front, back, neck. The only thing still on there is a little bit up on the head. We I wasn't too sure what I was going to do with the head, and I still am not. I might be cutting the top of it off, but for now, we're just going to leave it there. The fretboard is black walnut, and it had some rough spots down in here because it is a low end guitar. And I just took some 180 sandpaper, some used 180, and I went across the grain like you're not supposed to, but instead of trying to get this way in between all the frets, it just didn't make any sense. So I did the bottom four, well, the bottom three frets because there was a little rough spot in here that kind of went over the bottom four frets. So I left this one so that I could take a look at it, and there's still a little rough spot there. So I think I'm going to sand it down because why not? And at that point, we're going to continue on with the refinishing. I'm still debating on whether to put on boiled linseed oil. I have some satin polyurethane, and from years ago, I've got just a touch of a provincial stain, and it goes a little more dark. Now, I don't know with the soundboard here, there's a sealer that was put on the wood before it was painted black. And I have sanded off a bit of the sealer here and there, but I don't know how the stain is going to adhere to the soundboard. It might just sit on the outside of the sealer. It might get into the grain. It might look different. So we're going to have a look at that and see where we go with that as well. But first thing off I'm going to do is sand down the fretboard. And with that, of course, sanding is not conducive to the microphone, so you're not going to hear any of that. But I am just going to sand and I'm going to go across the grain. Don't care. Oh well. And just sand it down, make it smooth. Okay. So sanding across the grain didn't do well. It's left great mark that way, but oh well. Don't care. I also went over it with some 1200 and it didn't seem to make much of a difference. We'll see because right now I've cleaned it with cleaner, which has pretty much dried out the fretboard altogether. So we're going to be oiling it and we'll see how it turns out after that. Now for the rest. I'm thinking I might do the back first just to see how it turns out. So the first thing we're going to do is give it a good cleaning with the cleaner, not a paid promotion. And we will make sure that we've got any oils off our fingers completely off the surface before we start. Okay, so I went over it with a little bit of 1200 grit sandpaper first, and then I've cleaned it off with all the guitar cleaner. Now I've got just a little bit of boiled linseed oil in the bottom of this here pan and paper towel. And we're just going to wipe it on the back. We'll make sure it gets a nice thick coat. And we'll see how it dries up. Something you got to know about boiled linseed oil. So when it dries out, especially in rags, it has a tendency to spontaneously combust. So be very careful about disposing of it. I'm going to take this rag and probably dip it in some water and let it sit overnight in water before it goes anywhere. So Take a quick look in the light. In the light. It has a rather glossy type feel to it. But let's make sure it's got a real good coat on. I think I'm going to do around the sides as well because I'll be able to do that and let it sit this way to dry out later. May as well do it all at once, right? So let's continue on. We're not going to do the neck just yet. I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet. So we'll just see as we go along. And I just got some on the neck, so probably going to have to do that. Looks like I got some on the front too. So, yeah, okay. So it's boiled linseed seed oil all the way across. Carefully do the bottom. Probably should have taken out the strap peg, but it'll be fine. Everything's just great. Let's do the front while we got it here. I'm just going to put it down on its peg on that little piece of material. Haven't needed to use too much of this, but we may do a few coats. Still not sure what we're doing with the bridge. We might be sanding it down, but that has a full coat on it. So let's find a place to hang this thing up and let it dry. And poof, it's a new day. We let this dry overnight. I did the back of the neck and everything. And what I found was the sanding across the grain on the fretboard was not the right thing to do. So I spent the last little while going with the grain. And I still have a couple more down in here to do, but watch me do it. No, I'm not going to make you watch me do it because sanding, microphone, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to finish that off and then we're going to see if we really need a second coat or not. We'll go from there. So I'm not a big fan of a black walnut fretboard. It's the first one I've ever had, but okay. But so what I'm doing is going over it with 180 grit sandpaper, flipped it so that it's got both sides, and then just put your thumb in one spot and run it right up to the fret, back and forth, and then turn around and do up to this fret. I'm being real careful not to scratch the faceplate. You should put probably a rag or something over it or tape it off. Either way, I'm just being careful. So now I've got the fretboard fairly well sanded up. It's good enough for now. Now we're going to oil it, not paid promotion. And then we will See just how it turns out after that. This is fretboard oil. Takes a little while to get out of the applicator. Going to get a nice solid full covering on this because I've cleaned it with the cleaner about maybe 7 or 8 times. I've sanded it so it is as dry as it has ever been, I'm guessing. So we will get a good coating on it and then we'll let it seep in for a little bit and then we will wipe off the excess. So sanding it down seemed to have opened up the pores pretty good because by the time I had oiled all the way down to this end was starting to look dry again. So we're going to let that sit on there for a couple of minutes and then we will clean it off. Notice I'm using a red rag for the oil. I always use beige rags for cleaner, red rags for oil because they do two completely different jobs. You don't want to mix them at all. And something you want to be careful about is you don't want to leave the oil on the fretboard too long because you don't want it to seep in under the frets because then they will just make them loose. So we're going to wipe this off. And the other thing, if you ever sand your fretboard like that, don't bother oiling it until you tape it off and polish the frets. Because there's a couple of frets here I've just noticed when I was wiping this off that have some scratches in it. So now I'm going to have to tape it off, polish the frets, and then re-oil it. But while I'm waiting for all that, at least this oil will have seeped in and it will have a good base coat before we put the rest in. So now that we've wiped all that off, let's clear the bench and get ready to do some work on the tuning machines. So this is the tuner in question. It was number 8 or 6x4 3D. The second one on the lower, skinnier stringed side of the 12 string. It's the only string that is wound on the lower, skinnier side. And that's why I placed it there. It was actually the number 7 tuner, but I flipped it to the number 8 just because that one reason. Now I've gone at it before around the hole here with a small file, but I found a even better small file to go at it. Now it's on the lower end, so when the string comes through the spindle, is going to come this way. So I know which side I have to smoothen out. So I'm just taking the end of the little rat tail, putting it inside the hole, and coming out this way to kind of smoothen that off a little bit. Take whatever burr was in there off. I'm going to do up and down as well, just to be sure, and I'm going to do both sides. I looked at them, and this is what they call a Jink 2, JINNKE -2 tuners. I've never heard of them before. I even tried to do some research online, and I could not find anything on these tuners. So they might just be homemade, low end, who knows? But I'm just going to go over this one a little bit, and as I say, try and smoothen out this one little edge. You have to be careful because there's not a lot of material between the center hole and the outside of the spindle. But as I say, it's going to go on this way. The string's going to come up and go in this way. So I know that this is the side of the hole that needs to be smooth. Man, that even feels better just to my thumb and finger. So that's all I was going to do with that. Okay. Okay. Oh, drink. Cold coffee. That's just to remind you that you've been doing this too long and you should go get a warm one. Time to take a break. I don't think I'm going to mess with that much anymore. I just want to touch it up a bit and hope I didn't make it worse. So, since we just oiled the fretboard and the back of the neck, we're not going to be doing the polishing of the frets today. And that is because the tape won't stick to anything. So it's going to have to dry out. So the frets are a little bit marked, but they're not that bad. For what I usually do, I don't do a lot of bending in my playing. So it's not going to matter that much. We're just going to be making straight down contact on the frets. So we will wait until those oils all seep right in and the finish is dried up really good. And then we will tape off. What you want to do is slide a tape down each side first and then go across. That is so that when you're trying to remove it at the end, you just take the one strip and peel all the tape at once. That way you're not peeling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all these different cross sections. So I think at this point we're at final cleanup and reinstall the machine heads. So I'm really hoping that the cleaner is not going to pull up any of the finish I put on. I know it was just a boiled linseed oil that I put on it, but I'm hoping that this doesn't clean it all off. This is your basic guitar cleaner, not a paid promotion, blah, 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 blah. So we're just going to clean up everything. There are still sanding marks on the faceplate, but from a distance, you're not going to see them. I'm not too worried about that. As I say, this is a inexpensive experimental type guitar for me. So let's clean it up and get ready. So we're going to put all the tuning heads back in first, and then we will screw in the back. So we start out with number 1, and number 1 is the one that I signified was the largest skinny, or the largest or the fattest of the strings. So it goes over here. Now the washer that we put on, recall me saying that it was stamped from this side down, so it has rounded edges on this side and sharp edges on that side. You want the sharp edges down, and then the ferrule goes over, down through everything, and screws into the machine head. So as I say, we're going to put all of these back on first, and then we will turn it over and actually put the small screws in the back after the fact. Now the washer should be in the proper position because that's the way I put it on when I took them off. Put it on when I took them off, you know what I mean. That head has sharp edges on the spindle. Do I go over all of them with that rat tail? Maybe I do. I don't know who these jinky people are that made these tuners, but I think I'm going to take that rat file and just touch the edges of the hole coming through the spindle to see if it's going to make any difference on this or not. Seems that it is the fattest string on number 2. That's a good one to test on. And all I'm doing is taking the rat tail, putting it in through. I already know that the string's going to come out of this hole and wrap this way around because that. So all I'm doing is taking the small rat tail file, putting it inside the hole, and then dragging it out over that little ledge, just trying to take some of the burr off of it. And I already can feel the difference from what it was. So maybe I just go over all of them, or I inspect them as I'm putting them in and see which ones need an adjustment. And yes, I'm going to do both sides. And you can feel it with your finger. Coming this way, it's got a sharp edge. That way, it doesn't. So, yep, 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 yep. That's the thing with these less expensive guitars. They're going to have the cheapest of machine heads or any sort of hardware that they have. And that feels much better. Actually, the one side does feel a little rough. I could do this with it being attached to the guitar, but I think I'm going to do it this way. So we'll go over every one of them as we put them in. And so in putting these miniature Phillips screws back in the machine head, you be very careful not to drop it. I put it through the hole, then I wiggle this to make sure that the spike or this pointy part of the screw is in the original hole, and I just get it to the point of it taking hold. And we will go around afterwards and tighten them all down because of them being Phillips, you have to be very careful not to strip the heads. So I put the screw right on the driver, guide the screw into the mounting hole, wiggle it a bit to make sure that the screw is into the hole that is pre-drilled into the head. And then, as I say, just tighten it down enough that it holds. Now, once you get these ones planted and snug, don't over tighten them because you don't want to strip these, as we might have to take them out again. So we're going to get them taut and leave them there. The ferrules on the front of the headstock will hold a lot tighter. And for that, of course, as I say, we need our 12 or 10 mil deep socket. And even there, we're going to make sure they're snug. We're not going to over reef them either. Because as I say, we might have to remove them again. So just make sure they're not going anywhere. It's at this point that we go over all the tuning keys and just give them a little shake. They're all tight except for these two. There's a little Phillips screw right in the very end of it. Give it a slight tighten if it's loose. If you find there's too much tension on the keys, then loosen it a bit. They're all good. Then you just want to make sure that they turn easily. This one turns a little too easily, so it can get a little tightening. You want about the same tension on all of them. This one can take just a touch. They're very easily maneuvered, so you don't need much movement on the screw to make a bunch of movement on the keys. This will not lock your tuners in. All this does is adjust the tension that it takes to turn them. And that's because right between the key and the machine head, there's a little nylon gasket, and this just holds the key on and pinches on that gasket just enough to make a bit of pressure. Okay, I think at that point we are ready for the nut, pins, and strings. Woohoo! So when installing the saddle, not the nut, the saddle, you'll notice at one end there's some compensated adjustment on the saddle itself. That is usually for the skinnier strings or the bottom if you're looking down from the top of your guitar. So if you have that out and you forgot which way it is, the compensated goes to the skinnier end, like so. Voila. Now, let's get some strings. So when stringing a 12-string guitar, the first one is usually because you have pairs of strings. The first four, the bottom four, the larger four, the thicker four, whatever you want to call them. There's a thicker and a thinner string. You start with the thinner string. And then on the end of the string, there's a little spindle. You take the roller this way, let it roll down into the hole. Take your pin with the groove towards the top, start pushing down. Once you get so far, the pin will start to move, but the string will not. That is what you want. Plant that and run the string up to the other end. The first string goes into the first spindle. So we're going to go up past the second one and cut it there. That will give you enough string to wind around that spindle. Hold on to both sides of the string when you cut it. That way the tail doesn't go flying across the room. Keep it in a good safe spot. With that, we take our winder. We get the spool in about the right spot. Stick the tail through, just a little bit sticking out. You don't want too much because you're going to poke yourself on it eventually. And crink the string. Start rolling around. The first time the tail comes around, you go over the tail. and then keep winding. When the crinked part comes around, go under it and keep rolling down into the headstock of the guitar. This will give you a good break angle at the nut and make better contact with it. Mm, me. And then repeat 11 more times. So once again, skinny string of the two of the pair goes first. Roller rolls down into, don't put it sideways. You want it to roll down in. Peg with the groove to the string pointing towards the headstock goes down so far, and then see, that time the spool did not roll off the end of the pin. We want to make sure that that happens. So you go down so far, and then there. Pin keeps going, string does not. And crank, pull up to this end where we go two past the one we want to roll into and cut above that. Hold both sides, put the tail in a good spot. Put the tail through the spindle so it just sticks out the other side and crank it. Wind around. The winding goes over the first of the tail and then down under from then on in. The only other thing, and I really shouldn't have to say this, but I bought some guitars lately that were this way. The string always goes up the middle and winds out. Up the middle and winds out. Don't go around the outside and wind in on either of these sides. Goes up the middle and winds out. You want to keep this as straight as possible. I know, but I found it that way on two guitars I bought lately. Now the two skinniest pair, the two strings are the same gauge and they get tuned to the same note. So where you were watching to make sure you got skinny fat, skinny fat, skinny fat, skinny fat, the last two are skinny, 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 or skinny, skinny, skinnier, skinnier. So that's the one thing you gotta see that will confuse you, maybe not, but just something to keep an eye on. So that's going to do it for this week. My Vangoa'n VA20CE BKML 12, no longer BK or M, which was for matte black. We just sanded it down and went over it with some boiled linseed oil. Might put on a clear satin polyurethane after the fact, but I like it a lot better than I did in the black, because with the flat black, I'm a finger picker, so I rest my fingers here on the body and you were getting fingerprints there. If my arm was sweaty at all, you got a good shiny spot up in here. It just didn't look right. So for $130, left-handed 12 string, I think it looks fairly good. So thanks for watching. Please share, like, subscribe, leave a comment below. We'll catch you next time. Bye now.